Dhiraj, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
Great, thank you so much.
So listen, you look very young anyway, but I'm going to take you back to when you were super young, when you were a mere babe in arms.
Right.
What were your aspirations? What did you want to be?
I don't know. My dad used to work for Air India, so I grew up all over the world. I was born in Delhi in India, and then we lived in Athens, and then in Paris, and then in Calcutta, and later in Geneva, and Singapore, and Tokyo. So I think I love to travel and see the world, and I guess I was quite free spirited that way. But I never really thought about work. I thought I could be a pilot, for instance. But yeah, so my profession was as much an accident as anything else.
Okay, all right. So what got you into technology?
I was, uh, interested in technology as a little boy. My father bought me a ZX Spectrum in 1982, which was a tiny little home computer, and I started writing little programs in BASIC and making them run. So I think that's what got me interested. I was the first generation, if you will, of kids growing up with a computer at home, and it was a big expense for my family at the time. But I think that carried on into when I was at university. I used to work as a consultant, helping other people with using their computers. And then I ended up in San Francisco, in the heart of Silicon Valley. My first job when I was 22, and I think things went from there.
That was really insightful of your parents to make that big investment actually in a computer. I mean, what a wonderful start for you. That's fantastic.
That's exactly right. And I think that I try to remember that as I think about my kids and what are the things I should be investing in which would help them in their future. And that's, I guess, my thoughts for other people and other parents as well. Sometimes something might feel a little mysterious or uncomfortable, but it might be the key to an uncertain future.
Fantastic. So we have to talk about Shazam, of course. So, for anybody out there who may be living under a rock and not know what it is, could you explain what the Shazam app is and how you came up with the idea?
Sure. So I think a universal frustration is to hear a song and not know what it's called and who it's sung by. And that was the problem we tried to solve. So we came up with really the first mobile music recognition app. So in the old days, dial a number and you'd get a text message with the name of the song and the artist, which then evolved into an app which you can use on a smartphone, and you get an immediate response. So if you haven't heard of it and you hear songs and you don't know what they are, try it out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love it. I think it's fantastic because it solves so many arguments. It really does.
Thank
So,
you.
so tell me, how did you? I mean, that was founded in 2000 with
That's it.
co-founders.
Yes.
Tell us the story of how you built it.
Sure. So my co-founders and I were good friends. We lived in Silicon Valley at the time when everyone wanted to be an entrepreneur, and we thought, hey, we should be entrepreneurs as well. So we were trying to come up with an idea, and frankly, we came up with lots of terrible ideas. I'm glad we didn't go down that path. But Shazam really was something which was a personal need. We would, hear music, didn't know what it was, and my business partner Chris came up with the original idea for Shazam, which frankly I thought was slightly ridiculous because we didn't have the technology, we didn't have a catalog of music, we didn't even know how we were going to make money, but we threw ourselves into it, and I'm glad to say that it had a happy ending.
Did you imagine that it would be so successful?
Frankly, no. We never imagined, first of all, that it would take so long. We had no idea that it would be so hard. Otherwise, we may never have started. And frankly, it is a real privilege that it's still around today. And nothing makes me happier than the fact that my kids use it. So no, I couldn't have dreamt any of that.
Was it hard though to let it go?
No, not at all. Because the analogy I use, it's like having a grown-up daughter who goes off to uni. Of course, you remember her when she was a babe in arms, but you've got to let go. So it's the same thing with a business. And I think the analogy is okay because from the time we started to the time we sold the business to Apple last year was 18 years, which is, I think, a long time and time to let go.
Actually, yeah, you're right. It is like being an adult. 18 years is about right, isn't it? Fantastic, brilliant. So tell me, you now are an angel investor in startups in tech for good. So my question here is, how do you know that their tech is for good and it's going to be used for good? How do you identify that?
Sure. So I look at founders who are, explicitly trying to create businesses which have a purpose and try to, have a positive impact on society and the planet as a whole. And I guess the reference point is the Sustainable Development Goals, which are signed by 193 countries and aim to make the world a better place by 2030. Now, it doesn't need to be that intense, but combining the profit motive as well as the purpose motive, it's something which is still relatively new, but that's where I like to spend my time and energy supporting those kinds of businesses.
Fantastic. And is there something you've invested in that you are particularly excited about? I don't know if you could even share it.
Yes, absolutely. So, for instance, I've invested in a company called Me Vitae, and it's started by a couple of Oxford scientists, a neuroscientist and a computer scientist. And what they try to do is to help their clients avoid unconscious bias in their recruitment. So, for instance, the average recruiter looks at a CV for 6 seconds, jumps to conclusions, which then excludes women, minorities, differently abled people. Whereas using a machine, the term they use is augmented intelligence, so adding to a recruiter's human knowledge, but removing those unconscious biases that we're all victims of. So that's an example of the kind of thing which I support.
And actually, yes, I can see how that is actually tech for good. I absolutely get that. That's a really good one. I like that. And actually, talking about recruitment leads me on to a really important question. What skills do you think organizations need to develop or even bring in order for them to be successful in the digital space?
Yeah, I think that adaptability is key, and in the old days, a body of knowledge could sustain you for a career. Now it's about learning new skills and adapting to a rapidly changing environment. And to be honest, that's what young people have today. That's how they think, to have a basket of skills which then evolves over time. So my advice would be to understand the need of the next generation and how they think about the future of work, and to bring those skills on board to create more adaptable organizations as well.
Brilliant advice. A masterclass in an answer there. So tell me, is that the main challenge you see for businesses trying to be successful in the digital space? Would you say that, or are there other challenges too?
No, I think that's the main challenge, because getting one's head around emerging technology and the future is important, but to a certain extent, one at best is making educated guesses, and technology has a habit of never playing out exactly how you expect. I think what's more important is the ability to change direction quickly, the ability to come up with new ideas, depending on the environment, the ability to plan to change directions and have options available. And that's a different kind of thinking perhaps from what made companies and organizations successful in the past, which is about consistency, repeatability, driving costs down through efficiency. And at the end of the day, technology, it doesn't stand alone. It fits into a business, or creating those organizations of the future. So it's bringing those two disciplines together, I guess, the technology discipline and the business discipline. And in one word, adaptability, I think, is key.
Brilliant. Adaptability. Thank you. I'm going to make a note of that. That's really good. Tell me, so you talk about digital DNA when you go out to speak. What does that mean?
So digital DNA for me is about this affinity with technology and its implications. And I think of it, for instance, playing with new apps or experimenting with new technology. and then creating a point of view about the future. How will we work alongside intelligent machines, for instance? What would it feel like to be in charge of a driverless car? What would you do with all that time on a long drive, and or non-drive? And then the third is allowing one's imagination. So what could one create if one had those opportunities? If you could have a virtual reality house, what would you do with that? What would it lead to? And I think that combination of experimenting, visualizing the future and allowing one to come up with ideas is what I call digital DNA. I think it's essential to be able to have that adaptability I was referring to earlier.
I'd quite like a self-cleaning house myself, I think.
Brilliant.
Yeah, maybe you could work on that as your next tech for good startup. That would be great.
My wife would love that too.
Yeah, fantastic. So you're also researching looking over the horizon. Is that connected, or is that? Tell us a bit about that.
Yes. So my grandfather was the commander-in-chief of the Indian Navy, and one of the toughest part of his jobs was when you were a watch officer. So you climb up in the crow's nest, which is at the top of a mast of a ship, for instance, and it's cold, it's dangerous. You have to be alert and you have to look out at what's happening. But that allows you to look over the horizon almost literally. And I think I use that term because it's not hard to look out, 3 months, 6 months, or a year. We are capable of doing that. But to look further out than that, it's difficult. It's uncertain. It can feel uncomfortable. But that allows one to actually anticipate better, take defensive action where necessary, or find those opportunities which one can't see from ground level. And I think what I was referring to earlier as well, those habits, those attempts at looking ahead, I think pay off, even though they might feel a bit, uncomfortable. Part of that is looking at technology. Part of that is looking at young people, and part of that is tapping into one's own experience to envision the possibilities.
And it's interesting because in all of your career, there's sort of been this underlying theme of working with young people. You've always liked to work with young people. When you were at the bank, I think Shazam, I'm sure many young people loved that in particular.
Yes.
But also you're working now with Gen Z specifically. So for anybody who doesn't know which generation Gen Z is, there's so many generations. Tell us a bit about who they are and why them.
Sure. So Generation Z are people who are born in 1995 or later, so coming up to 24, 25. And the reason this generation is quite different is because they've been marked with a major historical event, which was the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And what happened at the time is that the economic landscape got rearranged. So for instance, they may have parents who lost a job. They may have been pulled out of private school. They may have suffered some hardship. And what that's left for them is a great belief that they need to be self-reliant. They need to create their own future. They need to have the skills with them because they can't take things for granted. That makes them more entrepreneurial. That makes them look for environments where they can learn. That makes them, appreciate the opportunities to, evolve as they go. And this is the first generation which is entering the workforce alongside more and more intelligent machines, as we have, as I mentioned, artificial intelligence, for instance, in the enterprise. So you can't manage them by offering them a bigger salary. They're not interested. They want to learn more. You can't manage them by saying, you're in charge of a big team. They're not interested. They want more flexibility. And you can't say you'll be promoted in 5 years. They want more than that. They want to have an impact. So understanding this generation, their motivations and how they work is critical to the future of the organization.
That sounds, I think I was born in the wrong time, because that sounds fantastic to me. I love all of that. So
Yeah.
yeah, wouldn't it be great to do? Anyway, speaking of time and
Yes.
speaking of machines, I like to put my speakers into a time machine,
Uh-huh.
and I like to take them back and to think about, knowing what you know now, having had all the
Yeah.
experiences you've had as a speaker.
Mhm.
I want to take it back and say, what advice would you give young Dhiraj starting out as a professional speaker? What would you tell him?
Well, I think that I've been really lucky in my career. I think as a speaker, I I'm thinking of it as a business as well. How can I deliver the best quality? How can I learn the most from this experience? How do I make sure that my audiences are as satisfied as they are? I'm thinking of, for instance, doing a course in learning to be a comic, because I like to entertain my audiences. If they come away with one thing that they can keep with them, that's fantastic. But the feeling of hearing about these anecdotes and experiences. So I would call myself quite early in my journey, but putting myself in the shoes of the audience, and so they have that most memorable experience. That's what I would go back and advise myself to keep in mind, I guess.
I think that's excellent advice. Thank you so much, Dhiraj. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Take care.